Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, and today I'm joined by Barna President David Kinnaman and the one and only Bob Goff.
Hey, I'm so glad to be on with you guys. I've the benefit not everybody listening has, which is I get to see your face, both of you, men that I really respect and admire. I'm just so delighted we get some chance to talk.
Well, so am I. David, we should bring Bob in as a regular. I bet you people would love that.
I think we should. It's good to see you, Bob. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, this is good stuff.
So, Bob, you know what we usually do on this show is we work through some statistics, and David, as always, brings the data. And so, David, what are we going to talk about now? I think we're going to talk a little bit about the perception of the church in the marketplace, and then we're going to interview Bob, which is fantastic.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Bob, we started this podcast almost exactly 2 years ago when the pandemic.
You're right.
And so it's on the happy 2 year anniversary, Carey.
Happy 2 year. And I always want to say unhappy because we started it because of a crisis, you know?
That's true.
And now the world has spiraled somewhat further out of control. So, but I'm glad we get to do this.
Yeah, likewise. And so, Bob, part of our mission is to try to help people understand change, what's happening, hear from other leaders, hear from the people they serve. It's actually, I think, one of the great privileges of being a researcher is that despite all the powers of observation that is inherent in the human brain, that God has given us these tools to actually understand what someone else's perspective looks like. And survey research, quantitative research, qualitative research can be a great tool for that. So we're sitting here at the edge of 2 years on the pandemic. So many people's perceptions of local churches in some cases have gotten better. Local churches have shown up in some really cool and creative ways to serve people's needs. But overall, we find that 44% of U.S. adults have a positive reaction to local Christian churches, 25% have a negative reaction to local Christian churches, and 31% have what we describe as an indifferent. They're sort of like neither neutral nor they're neither hot nor cold. I always think that indifference is actually a harder barrier to break through than negativity. And so what I'd love to ask you to start out with is just, what do you think churches could do to improve their reputation in their local communities? You've done such a great job of sort of helping us understand, the heart of joy and serving others and just leading with laughter and a lightness of being. What do you think are some ways that, the churches could sort of change some of the perceptions, and does that matter, and why should it?
Yeah, I've got some statistics of my own. I think 100% of people like brick buildings with steeples because what's there not to like? I just think they're conflicted about the people that are within the brick building with the steeple. So I don't have a bone to pick with the church. The church is terrific. Bride of Christ. Never gone to a wedding with a scorecard, and when the bride comes down the aisle, you hold up a 6 and say, "I've seen better." No. Like that's how God feels about the church from everything I've been reading. It's just how people feel about it. And I would describe these people as church adjacent, so that they're nearer the church. They've seen the church. They've seen the people that say they are the church. They just don't like the way that they act on Tuesday. They just want to know. Part of it is this authenticity. I don't think anybody has a problem with the person who's figuring it out. You go like, "Oh, that's awesome." Maybe if their president's still figuring it out, that would be more alarming. But you just need to assume that the people that are going to the church are still figuring things out rather than being so certain about everything. I really like, it's Mark 9. It's the prayer of a father. He said, "I believe, just help my unbelief." I'm that guy. Like I'm the Mark 9. I'm that dad. I believe, just help me the parts that I don't believe yet. Actually, let me understand what it is that I don't believe yet. I think if we had a bunch of buildings with bricks around them and a steeple on top with people that are doing that, people would be lined up. It'd be like Harry met Sally. I want what they're having. So I think just a big dollop of authenticity is the thing. It's like a gill net for people. They just hear authentic relationships. It'll just gill net every person that's swimming by. You want to be a fisherman, be authentic.
Bob, my guess is almost everybody who's listening to this podcast is familiar with some of the good works you and your Love Does team do around the world, right? Like when we were talking, getting ready to record, you're going to be opening a school over here and doing a school for women there and opening this over there. You're doing all these, what I would call, um, they're not compassion projects, but the word in my mind was like apologetics. Apologetics comes from the Greek, which means defense, right? But really, this feels like an advance. I'm guessing you don't get a lot of opposition when you want to go up and open up schools or feed the poor or that. I mean, maybe you do from local people, but warlords, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, what do you think of that as an advance for the church in the future of just loving people?
When you started saying that, I'm thinking about Simon Peter's letter to his friends to make a defense for the hope that's within you, but then keep reading. Like a lot of people stop there. They want to lawyer up for Jesus to say, but to do it with kindness and respect. And I don't always get that right, but this is what I'm aiming for. And then to have people deal with you with kindness and respect. I think if we can do that, be trustworthy. And again, we're all growing, but if you ever had, and it happened to me recently, it was beyond a misunderstanding. It felt like a betrayal by a friend. And just go like, oh, wow, like that's crazy. That would be, it doesn't make me not like the church. It makes me wonder about people if they're trustworthy. And I think when your numbers, your percentages are out there, that will skew it. If people like ask an underlying question, have you felt a betrayal from somebody who professed like Christ is Lord, but then the way they talked about you behind your back was like differently? That's uncovering some of the hard stuff. I mean, I'm the happy guy. I don't want to deal with that, but to just say like, wow, we need to actually help my unbelief on this thing. Like if you're standing in disbelief, to say like, oh, let's talk about that a little bit. And we've all got a long way to go, but boy, if you really want to be the church, just figure that stuff out, and it's beautiful and messy and worth it.
I think that's happened to almost every leader over the last 2 years, where they heard people were talking about them behind their back, friendships dissolved. What approach do you take when you're faced with a situation like that, Bob?
Yeah, usually it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll. I'll just call it a nesting doll this week. But to just say it's like there's the outward version of what's going on, like Happy Bob, right? He's like the yippee skippy and all that. But then say what's underneath that, under that veneer, and it's an authentic veneer, but there's a thing under that. If you peel down that we're all insecure, we just deal with our insecurities differently. So I deal with being insecure by being fun. And so sometimes people deal with being insecure by being a jerk. Sometimes people deal with their insecurities. So I would kind of ask that question if I was doing a dating app, and I won't. But if I was, I would say, how do you deal with your insecurities? And if the response, it'll be a guy, I promise, they'll say, I'm not. I'd be like, we're not. That would be like those jury instructions, go straight to the verdict form. Be like, you can skip all the rest of the stuff. To say like, we're insecure, but what are you insecure about and why are you insecure about it? That means taking apart this nesting doll and to say, what's the thing underneath a thing underneath a thing? And that's why I think it's so beautiful where David is finding people and polling their thoughts on that, so we can bring it to us in the aggregate, because it's definitely pointing at something. And the thing for us is not to just figure out what is it pointing to, but what is it pointing to for me, and how am I going to respond to that?
I always think that it's such a privilege to be able to hear from people. We've interviewed close to 2 million people in the 25, 30 years. I've been here 27 years now, and such a privilege to hear from them. And all the moments in their lives that lead them to a 15-minute survey, and they're ticking a box that say I'm lonely, or I'm, what one stat is, only 1 in 3 pastors say they're satisfied with how they spend their time during the week. And we know that's about the same proportion of US adults. And it's like, all these moments that lead up to the moment that give us a little window into their hearts, their schedule, their priorities, their self-perceptions. What have you learned about as you observe human nature these last few years, as you've been traveling a lot, inspiring people, but also just living life?
Yeah, I was thinking about your 31% of people that are indifferent. I'd want to ask a follow-up question. I bet that comes all the time when you're asking these questions. It then begs, it's like catnip for another question. And my next question would be like, how polite are you to the 31%? And I'd say 90% of your 31% are really polite. They're not indifferent. They're just trying to be polite, to say, I don't want to say anything bad and I don't have anything good to say. So I'm just being polite. So they actually, if we could figure out what's going on in there, and I don't want to have Christians be the most polite people to walk the planet, and they're not. I want them to be the most authentic ones, that they're reading the room in their own life. They know what's going on inside of them. They're not distracted by what's going on outside of them. And they can actually figure out, what's my next move? Instead of getting wounded and staying wounded, just say, like, where could I go for some help? Like, who would be a person that could be trustworthy and save? And then if somebody isn't trustworthy or betrays a friendship, then to say, I'm not going to make up a rule that people aren't safe. And I'm not going to be polite and say that didn't hurt. So I think it's just this thing, and then not just to get wrapped around the axle of introspection, but to just kind of understand, God, I wonder what's going on here. And like kind of just say, what am I feeling? What I'm doing? What am I going to do about that? I've been doing 3 things. It's been kind of helpful, like to actually put into play, is I just say, what's the most generous explanation for what just happened? Insert the church. What's the most generous explanation? What's the most realistic explanation for what happened? What do I really, I know I was the nice guy, but like now I want to get really what's going on. And then third, say, what's the most optimistic explanation? Like forward thinking, where can I go? Where might this point us towards? So to start with being generous, with this be kind and respectful, and then just get real about it. What do you think? What happened there? What's going on in the church? What's going on in this friendship? And then say optimistically, what might happen next? Because I want people of faith to be the most optimistic, forward-thinking people, because the whole premise is that we don't need to be who we were. And I want to act like that. So if you weren't cool in your earlier iteration of you, which is yesterday, then be a little cooler in the present new creation iteration of you. Just say, I don't know, I'm not going to withhold being nice until my perception of somebody else needs to, get right on something that I perceived as a wrong. I just want to say optimistically, where do we go from here? And I would say it's a fair question for the church. I think it's the right question to say. How do we become better versions of us, but how do we become a more accurate reflection of Christ?
Yeah, we're recording this and it'll probably change, of course, by the time it airs, in the midst of, I think we're 5 days into the war in Europe, Russia invading the Ukraine, and people have been talking about who can mediate, and peace talks have started. We'll see where they go. But I've been thinking about it. And Bob, honestly, your name popped up. I know that you have, because you've written about it and spoken about it publicly, have mediated peace before between different factions. You've had world leaders gather. When you think about mediating conflict at a global level or even at a specific level within congregations, what are some principles? And again, you're a highly skilled lawyer. What are some principles that really help diffuse conflict and tension?
Yeah, part of it is to realize how bad at it you were. When you were saying these really nice things, I was thinking about how I couldn't even get my boys to get along when they lived under
Well,
my
you're
roof.
not God, Bob. Let's just be
Yeah.
honest, okay? That's parenting.
Yeah, it was just a dumpster fire when they were living under my roof, and then they grew up and went to college, and they're inseparable. Like they were together when they weren't under my immediate input and control. They just did terrific. And so part of it is to realize how ill-equipped we are to do this. And then it's not being like humble. It's just saying it's being accurate, and then to say it actually need to bring in some power from on high to do this, because this is something that would be so beyond. But I think part of it is to not just give well wishes, but get in the game. I literally put love does into Russian and sent a case to that guy.
Really?
Literally did. Yeah. Yeah. Evidently, it happened a while ago. So evidently he didn't read it or he wasn't buying the premise of the book. I haven't ruled it out, but I don't want, I said it to the other guy in North Korea too, that's creating problems. I put it into Korean. I sent it to them. I don't want to just do it. And it isn't like a doorbell ditch. It's just like to say, well, I don't know, would this work? What a great way for a church to operate, to say, I don't know, would this work? You're picking a lock. And the lock is like the Federal Reserve, the combination on this vault that they have. It changes like 10,000 times every second. And I had, children, adolescents, they change every second too, probably more often. And so to say we're trying to pick the lock, and now complicated by getting this intergenerational church, and some people are talking to God with their arms over their head, and some of them are talking with their hands in their pockets. And to just say, how can we talk to everybody? And the fact is that you won't be effective. But I think if we're curious about everybody, Philippians 2:20, Paul talking about Timothy, a guy who's genuinely interested in other people's affairs, like to come with that genuine interest. You pick the social issue of the day, gay, straight, Buddhist, Baptist, find people who are genuinely interested, not making you a project, but just making you a friend. And to say, man, I came to learn. I didn't come to teach. That doesn't mean you're going light on doctrine. It's going big on Jesus.
1 in 3 pastors, back to that stat David shared, say that they're not satisfied with how they spent their time in the past week. And I think we can all identify that to some extent. It's like, wasted that, should have done that.
Actually, only 1 in 3 say they're satisfied. So most are dissatisfied on some level with how they spend their time.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. So
that's why I'm here.
Exactly.
Fact check you in real time. Fact check you in real time.
I bring the spin. Your new book is called Undistracted, and you've admitted you struggle with distraction and allocating your time. What to you is the most valuable use of your time when you get it right, Bob? Like, you'll say, okay, I look back on a week, I did this really well.
Yeah, it would be that idea of like showing up in the room that you actually occupy. So when you're actually there, because you could be talking and looking at your iPhone and doing 9 things at once, and you're generally there, but you're not actually there. And so to show up, and then to not have meetings because somebody called one. Like I would imagine these pastors are just terrific men and women that want to love people well, and they could be running small countries, but instead they're serving at the local church. And so somehow they ended up being Pinocchio, and everybody has a string except them. And I want to just get all those strings together, and to say, instead of I'm taking all my strings back, can we just say, who is pulling on my left ankle right now? I got 2 things: stop it and stop it. And then can we bring these strings to Jesus? Can you take some of the people he's already dropped in your life that have been put adjacent to you, and to say, can you help me with this? It might be an administrative assistant. Oh, can we lose the lead pastor thing? I've been searching the scriptures. I just haven't found anything to say. There was one guy, the disciple Jesus loved, but we don't need to do this. I'm just like the next guy. I'm just a gardener. But if we eliminated some of those distinctions, and we just said we are all, servant priests, that we could be available equally, each within our own, personality makeup, but just each in our own way, then what we're doing is we're collecting back the strings of expectation of what everybody thinks a pastor ought to be doing. And to say, I just need to free up some scheduled time. I think I'm 8 years into not setting appointments with people. So when people say, can we get together for coffee? I'm like, certainly. But then that's where it stops. I don't say on Tuesday at 4, because I might not be digging it on Tuesday at 4. So I tell people the arc of where I'm going. And if they want to intersect that arc, that's terrific. But I'm not going to be waiting for somebody. We're not going to talk about what shop. or what coffee place to meet. We'd just be like, this is what I'm doing. And if you want to intersect that, I'm the tall guy that has the Red Sox hat on.
So that's an interesting way of saying no. I was going to ask you, my next question
Oh,
was
it's
going to
like,
be,
yeah, like, yes. And here's
yes.
the arc, and I'll see you. I'll no wave because I'll be waving. And if I'm already with somebody, then come join in. Unless one of us is crying, then don't. Um, but but to just say like, but come intersect the conversation that we have, I'm like, it's a party.
And this is from the guy who has his cell phone number in the phone, or at least available to over 1 million people. So I know you've talked about this before, Bob, but I never get tired of hearing about this. That is a real number. It doesn't go to some, burner phone that you've got buried in the basement of your house or anything like that. Like, I've been with you when the phone is rung, and it is a number that you put at the back of your books. How do you deal? First of all, how many calls do you get? How do you deal with it? Yeah. What do you do? Like, run that through, because we think we're busy, but I want to hear how you handle that and not just leave a litany of disappointment behind you, because I don't think you do.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is say hello. Just like so easy. And if somebody says, do you have a couple minutes? That's code for, do you have an hour and a half? And then I say, I don't have as much time as I wish I had to. And then that's just a nice way of saying, I'm here, but tell me what I can do for you. And sometimes some people, as they're collecting their thoughts, they'll start filibustering, and they'll start talking about this and that and the other. Say, hey, like, if we only had a moment, and we do, how can I be helpful to you? So it's just really helpful. That's what they asked me at Chick-fil-A. Like, how can I be helpful? Like, and like, in other words, do you know why you came? And so if somebody doesn't, rather than filibustering or making them feel small, to just say, here's my email address. It's bobgoff@bobgoff. See what I did there? Like, it's like, really just collect your thoughts. And some people actually do that. So instead of being short, but I also don't want to talk to people on their terms. Like, I don't talk on speakerphones, just because it feels weird. Like, phones are impersonal enough. And so I just say, oh, I don't talk to friends on speakerphones. It's like, I got no secrets. I can set the terms, because it makes me feel really hollow. Like, I might be having a conversation with, I think I'm talking to you, but then they'll put it up on YouTube, and it makes me feel like, oh, wow, that's crazy. Read Henry Cloud's book on boundaries. But to just say it helps them be more present if we're talking. And then to ask them, some people really know why they're calling. And they're not the ones that are winning out talking to me. I'm like, not just being generous. I'm winning out talking to them, because when I'm talking, I'm taking notes. I'm like, what can I learn from them? I'm ready. And if they start like a Mishner novel, like, when I was an embryo, I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to pick up the tempo here. So to just say, I only have a moment, how can it be helpful? And if it's going to be a longer explanation, I'll say, hey, I think I want to give you all the attention that this deserves. So just shoot me a quick little email. And then I get a couple hundred emails a day too. And I just answer them, usually 2 or 3 sentences. And I just feel so honored. I have 39 emails that are unanswered in my inbox right now, out of probably 250 today. And I'd be like, that's awesome. I just love, it honors me. When I write to you, Carey, it's honored me when you wrote back. You said, hi, great to hear from you. It'd be like, awesome.
You're very great too. That's another thing in terms of pastoral skills. I've gotten, and I know I'm not alone, random notes from you, handwritten, to my house. They're simple. They're like, just want you to know you're making a bigger difference than you think. You're awesome, Bob. Stuff like that. Why do you do that? I know we all know we should, but you do it.
Yeah, I would take it, as that little nudge that you need. You don't know when it's going to intersect, and you're not doing it to curry people's favor. You're doing it because that's what like extravagant loves. I mean, I'm not sure, we're already friends. We don't need to be friends. We're there. But that kind of nudge, like a high five along the way, to just knowing that it might be the little cup of water you need. I know I feel the same way too. Like, I just think like just a high five, like, we're in this. Come on, let's do this thing. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but that availability, I'd love for that to be among the hallmarks of our faith, the stuff that kind of leaks out of us. But that said, I'm married to Sweet Maria Goff, and she's available 100% to me, Lindsay, Richard, Adam, the people they married, the people they made. That's it. So she's crystal clear on who she's available to and why. So I would say for our pastors doing the impossible work of shepherding well, to just say, find out like who you're going to be available to, and then decide how you're going to be available to it, and then create whatever kind of structures help serve that. And if the answer is, I need to be available to less people, I'm going to hide in the green room, I'm not going to meet anybody ever because I'm the lead pastor. It's not a poke. It's just like, I just go get some bag of saltwater taffy and meet everybody at the front door and say, I am so glad you're here with us today. I'm telling you, they will meet Jesus. And it isn't because the saltwater taffy is good. It's that kind of love and acceptance is really good.
Oh, that's great. David, any other thoughts before we wrap up? Man.
Well, I heard you speak back in Arizona a few months ago. We got a chance to hang out and spend some time together. That was really special to me and some of our friends. And you talked a little bit about sort of the pace of our life, the even counting down, teach us to number our days so we may gain a heart of wisdom, says Scripture. And I'd love just to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about that these days, and just encourage us as we sort of kind of zoom out and think about where we're at 2 years from the pandemic. Some of us are looking at these questions of, the challenges that the church finds itself in, and just give us some perspective about how you're sort of counting down and thinking about your life and your impact.
Well, think about this for a second. 107 billion people have ever lived, give or take. There's 7.5 billion of us right now, and most of us can't get along. So there's 15 people who have already lived the full course of their life that are no longer here. And I don't know what their story. I know the story of a couple of them. There's a guy named Einstein that had some crazy hairdo going. And there's another guy, George Washington, that evidently cut down a cherry tree and admitted it. Like there's like little bits and pieces of people, but what are we leaving behind? And I have a bias, as you two do, to writing things down. This is crazy. I got 3,337 weeks left. Like that's it. Like, 3,337 lived, 700 or so left. And so with these 700 weeks that I have left of the 4,000 most of us get, I want to leave some stuff behind. I want to actually leave some things behind. And nobody needs my face chiseled in the Dakotas on the side of a cliff. But what we could do is leave some of these things behind. You're a busy pastor, you're a busy person, and you've got a kid or a spouse that you married, or a kid that you made or adopted or fostering. Sit down and write them a letter today. It doesn't need to be a book, 5 sentences. Put that thing as inefficiently as you can in an envelope, melt wax on it, smush your finger in it if you don't have a seal on your ring. But do something. That's the stuff that's going to go in a shadow box. To be thinking like so far in advance, like what's actually going to matter down the road. And I want to give a bunch of airtime to that rather than all the things that are distracting us that don't. And I think you can do both. You don't need to pick. It's not binary. Like you can pick both. And so we can do some things that matter in commerce, if that's your thing. And you can talk about growing your church and the number of people that attend, which is terrific. That's one metric. I would just continue to find, as you are, finding more metrics. Like I have a bad truck and I got 5 or 6 gauges to just tell me how the truck's doing. And it just, so I would just say, don't figure out the mileage you're putting on yourself. Just say like, what's the mileage I'm putting on the people around me by being me? And turns out I'm putting a lot of mileage evidently on the people around me, and I need to figure that one out. So I'm a high energy guy. I'm like, come on, let's do this. I make coffee nervous. So I'm like, go, go, go. But that puts a lot of miles. It's like pulling up the gas station, all the numbers are spinning fast. You might putting a little bit more mileage on people than they would prefer. And having these honest but kind conversations, grousing about it, that ain't a kind conversation. Talking to other people about it would be way not kind, but to talk about what's happening and then come with 3 solutions. As a trial lawyer, well, I had a bunch of associate lawyers who would come in all wigged out about whatever it was, and that's easy to issue spot, but give me 3 solutions to that. So I know you've identified this is the issue. You give me 3 solutions to that. That's actually a great way to modulate what's coming your way. To just say, I know we got problems. Tell me a couple of solutions. And even if they're bad ones, go back and get better ones.
Bob, it's never boring. It's always encouraging. I want to thank you so much for being with us on Church Pulse Weekly. Leaders, Bob's got a brand new book. It's called Undistracted: Capture Your Purpose, Rediscover Your Joy. He's the chief balloon inflator. There's a new title over at what he does these days. And leaders, I want to thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If this episode helped you, share it with someone you care about, and we'll be back next time on Church Pulse Weekly.